The night I refused to co-sign my son-in-law's loan. Hello everyone, and thank you for being here with me today. Before we begin this story, I want you to know that what you're about to hear contains lessons worth holding on to, even though the events themselves are crafted for reflection. My name is Arthur Mitchell. I am 62 years old, and I have lived in the same brownstone in Brooklyn, New York for 33 years. The living room still has the same sage green wallpaper that Margaret picked out the summer we bought this place. She stood on a step stool with a roller in one hand and a glass of wine in the other, laughing every time she dripped paint on her favorite sweater. He never changed that wallpaper after she passed. I told myself it was because the task of redecorating felt overwhelming for a man living alone. But the truth was simpler and sadder than that. That wallpaper was the last thing in the house that still held her presence. Margaret died 9 years ago, cancer, the doctors called it. As if one word could capture what it felt like to watch the woman who had been your entire world for 42 years slowly fade away. I held her hand in that hospital room at Brooklyn Methodist, the same hospital where I had worked for 38 years as a facilities engineer. She looked up at me with those gentle hazel eyes and said the last thing she ever said to me. Arthur. Her voice was barely a whisper. Take care of Jessica for me. Promise me. He pressed her hand against my cheek. My throat was closing up, my eyes burning. I promise, sweetheart. I will. She smiled, and then she was gone. He retired 3 years later. 38 years of fixing HVAC systems, repairing medical equipment, making sure the lights stayed on so doctors could save lives. When I walked out of Brooklyn Methodist for the final time, I stood on the sidewalk on DeKalb Avenue and cried in a way I hadn't cried since Margaret's funeral. Not because I would miss the work, but because I suddenly had nothing left to fill my days except the promise I had made to a dying woman. Jessica was my only child. 35 years old, worked as a pediatric nurse at the same hospital where I had spent my career, and had a laugh so much like her mother's that sometimes when I heard it from another room, my heart would stop for just a moment. She was gentle the way Margaret had been gentle. The kind of person who rescued injured birds, who sent handwritten thank you notes for every small kindness, who brought cupcakes to her colleagues on their birthdays. She married Derek Vance in the summer of 2016. I remember standing at the back of the reception hall watching my daughter dance with her new husband and thinking he seemed like a decent enough man. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy who opened doors and pulled out chairs and called me sir for the first 6 months before eventually graduating to Arthur with a familiarity I found either endearing or presumptuous, depending on the day. He told me he owned a commercial cleaning company in the Bronx. He said business was thriving. Business was never thriving. It started small, the way these things always start small. A phone call in the spring of 2021. Derek on the line, his voice smooth and apologetic, explaining that a major client had delayed payment and he was a little short on covering payroll that week. Could I lend him $800 just until things stabilized? He said yes. Of course, I said yes. Jessica was my daughter. Her household was my household. But 800 became 1500. 1500 became a car repair. A car repair became 3 months of mortgage payments. Every time I braced myself to say no, my phone would ring, and it would be Jessica, and her voice would be tight and strained, and she would say something like, Dad, I hate to ask, but things have been really difficult lately. And my chest would cave in on itself, and I would reach for my checkbook before she even finished the sentence. He kept a small ledger in the kitchen drawer. A plain brown leather book with a brass clasp. Every loan I wrote down, the date, the amount, what it was for. He told myself I was keeping records in case Derek ever paid me back. On a cold Wednesday night in November of 2024, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened that brown ledger, and added up every single entry. $42,800. 5 years. Not one payment return. Not one mention of repayment. Not one phone call from Derek that started with the words, "I want to talk to you about what I owe you." He sat there in the green kitchen with the ledger open in front of me and Margaret smiling down at me from her photo on the shelf. He pressed my hands flat against the table to stop them from shaking. My jaw was so tight my teeth ached. He thought about every time I had sat in this same chair and told myself that I was helping Jessica, that I was honoring Margaret's last wish, that I was being a good father. He thought about the $42,000 that represented 5 years of my retirement savings, carefully built, modestly lived. Then my phone buzzed on the table. A text message from Jessica. "Dad, can you come for dinner Saturday? Derek wants to talk to you about something important. I'm making your favorite pot roast." He read that message 3 times. Then I looked at the ledger. Then I looked at Margaret's photo on the shelf. Her smile was patient and warm, the way it always was. "I know," I said out loud to her picture, my voice cracking around the edges. "I know something's coming. He can feel it." He picked up the brown ledger and slid it into my jacket pocket. Whatever Derek wanted to talk about on Saturday, I was not walking into that house without knowing exactly what I had already given away. The drive to the Bronx took 45 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, but it felt longer than that. The November sky had gone the color of old pewter, flat and heavy, pressing down on the highway like a lid on a pot. The trees along the Hutchinson River Parkway had shed most of their leaves, leaving bare branches that scratched at the gray sky like pencil lines on paper. My hands were tied on the steering wheel, and the brown ledger was sitting in my jacket pocket, and I could not shake the feeling that I was driving towards something I could not turn back from. Hawthorne Avenue looked the way it always looked. Neat little colonials with raked front yards. A carved turkey on somebody's porch. A dog barking in a fenced yard 2 houses down. Normal, quiet, the kind of street that made you think nothing bad could ever happen there. He pulled up in front of number 1427 and sat in the car for a moment with the engine idling. Through the front window, I could see warm light and movement inside, more people than I expected for a quiet Saturday dinner. My stomach dropped about 3 inches. He got out of the car and rang the bell. Jessica opened the door. She was wearing a burgundy sweater I had not seen before, and her hair was pulled back, and the smile she gave me did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a person who had been told to smile and was doing her best. "Hey, Ad." She stepped aside to let me in. "Come on in, everyone's here." "Everyone." He stepped into the front hall and counted faces. Derek standing by the fireplace with a glass of whiskey. Too relaxed, too deliberate about how relaxed he looked. Evelyn Marsh, Jessica's mother, my ex-wife of 21 years, perched on the love seat in a cream-colored blouse, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. At the dining table, already seated, my ex-wife's brother, Hiral, and his wife, Patricia. Hiral had a gut that had grown considerably since the last time I saw him, and Patricia was wearing so much floral perfume that I could smell her from the hallway. Nobody said, "Good to see you, Arthur." Nobody said much of anything. They just looked at me the way a jury looks at a defendant walking into a courtroom. Derek set his whiskey down on the mantel and crossed the room with his hand extended. "Arthur." His grip was firm, one plump, businesslike. "Thanks for coming. Really means a lot." Of course, I said. He looked past his shoulder at Jessica. She had moved to the kitchen doorway and was gripping the door frame with both hands, her knuckles going pale. We sat down to dinner. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can. Jessica brought everything out herself, moving back and forth between the kitchen and the table with the focused efficiency of someone who needed to keep moving or she would fall apart. Nobody helped her. He pushed my chair back twice to stand up, and she shook her head at me, a tiny sharp movement, so I sat back down. The conversation during dinner was stiff and surface level. Gerald talked about a football game. Patricia asked me if I was still doing woodworking in the garage. Evelyn commented on the pot roast. He answered in short sentences and watched Derek. He ate steadily, unurried, and smiled at the right moments. He was performing patience. He had spent 38 years fixing things that were about to break, and I knew the specific stillness of a man waiting for the moment he had engineered. The moment came when Jessica cleared the last of the dinner plates. Derek reached under his chair and lifted a folder onto the table. It landed with a flat, deliberate thud. Seek, maybe 50 pages bound with a black clip. He slid it across the tablecloth toward me. Arthur, I want to be straight with you. He leaned forward, forearms on the table, his voice pitched low and reasonable. The business has hit a rough patch. Nothing we can't get through, but we need to restructure a loan to bridge the gap. $75,000. The bank needs a co-signer with strong credit. He thought of you. He did not touch the folder. What's the interest rate? Derek smiled. 22%. It's just a formality, Arthur. You won't pay a single. 22% is not a formality, I said. That's a penalty rate. That's what banks charge people they don't trust. Evelyn leaned forward from the love seat. Arthur. Her voice had that particular tone, the one she had used throughout our entire marriage to indicate that I was being difficult in a situation where the correct move was to stop being difficult. You have the house in Brooklyn. You have your pension. You're not supporting anyone. Helping Derek is what a father does. Jessica is my daughter, I said. Derek is my son-in-law. That doesn't mean I co-sign a loan. You haven't read. He opened the folder. It took me 14 minutes to read through it. Nobody spoke while I read. I could hear Gerald breathing through his nose and the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the sound of Jessica's foot tapping a rapid anxious rhythm under the table. The loan documents were exactly as bad as I had expected. A cross-collateralization clause on page 9. A provision on page 17 that allowed the lender to pursue the co-signer's personal assets, including real property, after a single missed payment. A balloon payment structure that would make the monthly minimum look manageable until year 3 when the full principal came due at once. He looked up at Derek. How much do you currently owe across all your accounts? Not just this loan. Everything. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This is the main one. That's not what I asked. Arthur, how much do you owe? He says cut sideways for just a fraction of a second toward Jessica. She was sitting with her hands pressed flat on her thighs under the table, her shoulders pulled in, making herself as small as possible. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. Gerald cleared his throat. Arthur, my son-in-law took out a second mortgage last year to help my daughter keep her salon open. Family steps up. That's just how it works. Good for your son-in-law, I said. Patricia pressed her hand to her chest like I had said something offensive at a church picnic. "Arthur, this is your daughter's home we're talking about." He closed the folder. He picked it up and slid it back across the tablecloth until it sat in front of Derek again. "I can buy groceries," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I can pay a medical bill. He can give Jessica a place to stay if she ever needs one. But I will not sign this loan." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Derek stared at me for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Something cold and calculating that his pleasant expression did not quite manage to cover. Then he stood up. His chair scraped back hard against the hardwood floor, and Jessica flinched at the sound, a full body startle that she tried to disguise by reaching for her water glass. "Do you really want to watch your daughter lose her home?" His voice was very quiet, very controlled. He looked at him straight. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth, but I kept my hands flat on the table and my voice even. "The man who's going to make her lose it isn't me." Derek picked up the folder. He walked to the front hall. Jessica scrambled up from her chair and followed him. I heard them in the entryway, his voice low and sharp, her voice high and placating. Then the front door opened and the cold November air came rushing in, and the door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. Gerald and Evelyn exchanged a look. Patricia was pressing her lips together so tightly they had gone white. "You're making a terrible mistake," Evelyn said to me. Then she picked up her purse and walked out after them. He sat alone at the dinner table with the pot roast going cold and the green beans congealing in their serving dish. He looked down at the place where Jessica had been sitting. On the floor, just under the edge of her chair, was a small white button, pearl-colored, the kind that came on a woman's blouse. It had been pulled clean off. Not cut, not fallen. Pulled the way fabric pulls when someone grips a sleeve too tightly or twists an arm in a direction it was not meant to go. He reached down and picked it up. It sat in the center of my palm, tiny and weightless. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely close my fingers around it. I do not know how long I sat there at that empty dinner table with the button in my hand. Long enough for the pot roast to go completely cold. Long enough for the candles Jessica had lit in the center of the table to burn down another half-inch. Long enough for the sick, heavy feeling in my chest to stop being shock and start being something closer to certainty. He had seen that kind of flinch before. The way Jessica's whole body had jerked at the sound of Derek's chair scraping back. That was not a woman who had startled at a loud noise. That was a woman who had learned to brace for what came after loud noises. He stood up so fast my own chair nearly tipped over. Through the front window, I could see Derek's truck still sitting in the driveway, engine running, exhaust puffing wide into the cold November air. The passenger door was closed. They were still inside the vehicle. He grabbed my jacket off the coat hook by the door and walked out into the night. The cold hit me like a wall. He crossed the front yard in about 8 steps and knocked on the passenger window with 2 knuckles. The glass came down. Jessica looked out at me with an expression I had never seen on my daughter's face before. A complicated, terrible expression that was one part embarrassment and one part something rawer than that. Something that made my stomach drop straight through the ground. Dad. Her voice was careful, controlled. The voice of someone who had practiced being careful. "It's fine. We reused." "Let me see your arm," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Your arm. Your right arm. The sleeve that rode up when you were putting on your coat." In the driver's seat, Derek turned his head toward me. His expression was pleasant and absolutely empty behind the eyes. She caught her wrist on the cabinet door in the bathroom this morning. Artur, you know how clumsy she gets. I wasn't asking you, I said. He kept my eyes on Jessica. For a moment, she did not move. Then slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone performing an action they had rehearsed many times, she pushed her sleeve up to her elbow. The bruise ran all the way around her right wrist. Deep purple at the center, bleeding out to green and yellow at the edges. The colors of something that had been there for at least 3 or 4 days, not something that happened this morning on a cabinet door. It was the shape and placement of fingers, 4 on one side, a thumb on the other. My vision went white at the edges. My heart rate spiked so hard and so fast that I actually reached out and gripped the door frame to keep myself upright. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach past Jessica and drag Derek Vance out of that truck by his collar and ask him in very plain English what he thought he was doing to my daughter. Every muscle in my body was pulling in that direction like a current. But I had raised Jessica to trust calm. Margaret and I both had. And I knew, with the bone-deep knowledge of a father who understood his daughter, that if I lost my composure right now, Jessica would spend the next 3 weeks managing the fallout instead of thinking clearly about her own life. So I breathed one long, slow breath in through my nose, out through my mouth. The white at the edges of my vision receded. Jessica, I said. My voice came out low and even. You remember the necklace I gave you for your birthday last year? She looked at me carefully. Dad. The silver one. The one I said had a tracking device built into the pendant, and you thought I was joking. I paused. Something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of something careful and aware. Yeah, she said quietly. I remember it. On the clasp, I said. You push it twice, fast. That's all. 2 quick presses, and my phone gets your location. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter what time it is. 2 presses, and I'm coming. Derek's hand moved on the steering wheel. A single slow adjustment. The way a man shifts his grip when he is reminding himself to stay patient. Arthur. His voice was warm and reasonable and completely hollow underneath. You think you're reading a lot into a bruise from a bathroom cabinet. Jessica Brucey Cici. She always has. Isn't it that right, Jess? Jessica's eyes were still on me. They were bright and glassy in a way that told me she was fighting very hard not to let them spill over. Her chin was doing that small, barely there trembling thing it had done since she was 5 years old and trying not to cry in front of people. Right, she said. The word came out almost steady. He reached through the open window and put my hand over hers where it was resting on her knee. Her fingers were ice cold. He wrapped both my hands around hers and held on. I don't need an explanation, I told her. I don't need you to tell me anything you're not ready to tell me. I just need you to know that the necklace is there and that I will pick up every single time. No questions, no conditions. You press it and I come. That's it. That's the whole deal. A tear broke over her lower lashes and cut a track down her cheek. She turned her head slightly toward the windshield so Derek would not see it and pressed her lips together until the trembling stopped. You worry too much, she whispered. Probably, I said. That's what dads are for. Derek hit the horn. One short, sharp blast that made Jessica's whole body contract like she had touched a hot stove. We should get going, Derek said pleasantly. Early morning tomorrow. I let go of Jessica's hand. He stepped back from the truck. Derek put it in reverse and backed out of the driveway with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a man who believed he was completely in control of the situation. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold and watched the tail lights disappear around the corner of Hawthorne Avenue. The November wind cut through my jacket like it was paper. A few dead leaves skidded across the concrete and wrapped themselves around my ankles and let go. He stood there until the sound of the engine was completely gone. Then I reached into my pocket and closed my fingers around the small white button I had picked up from Jessica's kitchen floor. It was so light, so impossibly light for something that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He walked back to my car, got in, and sat with my hands on the wheel in the dark for a long time. The brown ledger was still in my jacket pocket. $42,800. He drove home to Brooklyn with every light on the dashboard blurring slightly, and I told myself it was just the cold air getting in my eyes. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen. He sat down at the table. He opened my laptop. In the bottom right corner of the screen, a small cloud icon glowed a steady, patient green. 4 years ago, when I rewired the electrical system in Jessica's house on Hawthorne Avenue, I had done something I had never told anyone about. Not Jessica, not a single soul. He stared at that green icon for a long time. Then I closed the laptop without clicking on it. He went to bed and lay on my back in the dark, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence of a house that used to have Margaret in it. He prayed I would never need to open that account. He had no idea that by this time tomorrow night, I would have no choice. He did not sleep. He lay on my back in the dark bedroom with my hands folded on my chest like a man in a casket, staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator knock and hiss in the corner. The digital clock on the nightstand cycled through the hours with a patience I could not match. 11:47, 23. 3:51. At 4:15 in the morning, I gave up entirely, got out of bed, and went back to the kitchen. The laptop was where I had left it on the table, closed. The little green cloud icon was not visible with the lid down, but I knew it was there, waiting, patient as a stone. He made a cup of coffee. He did not want it. He sat down in front of the laptop and let the memory come. It was the winter of 2021, January, right after New Year's. Derek had called me 2 weeks earlier asking if I could come take a look at the electrical panel in the Hawthorne Avenue house. He said a circuit breaker kept tripping something in the basement. He drove up on a Saturday morning with my tool bag and spent about 5 hours tracing the problem back to an overloaded outlet behind the washing machine. Simple fix. The kind of thing I had done 1,000 times over 38 years of keeping a hospital running. But while I was there, crawling around behind appliances and pulling outlet covers off walls, I noticed things that had nothing to do with the electrical panel. A glass on the kitchen counter with a crack running all the way down one side. The kind of crack that comes from impact, not a dishwasher. A throw pillow on the living room couch with a dark stain that someone had tried to scrub out and mostly succeeded. And Jessica. Jessica moved through her own house that day like a woman navigating a minefield. Always aware of where Derek was standing. Always angling her body so she was never fully between him and the nearest wall. Derek spent most of the morning in the living room watching football, which meant I could hear him clearly from wherever I was working. He called Jessica back into the room 3 times to bring him things he could easily have gotten himself. Each time she went without a word, without any expression on her face that could be called an expression at all. She had the flat, careful blankness of someone who had learned that having a face sometimes made things worse. At one point, I came out of the hallway and found her standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single glass, and she was gripping that glass so hard her knuckles had gone completely white. She was staring out the window at the gray January sky with an expression that cracked something open inside my chest. "Jizz," I said quietly. She startled so hard she nearly dropped the glass. Cold teeth turned to me with a bright automatic smile that did not touch her eyes for even half a second. "Sorry, Dad. Miles away. Do you want more coffee?" He wanted to ask her something direct. He wanted to say the plain and obvious thing that was filling up the room between us like smoke. But I had been a father long enough to know that pushing too hard, too fast, was the fastest way to lose the thread entirely. If Jessica was not ready to talk, pressing her would only make her dig in and protect him. That was how it worked. He had seen it happen to enough people over enough years to know it like a bruise I had pressed on too many times before. So instead, I went back to the hallway and finished what I had come to do. And while I was up on the step ladder in the living room replacing a faulty wall switch, my eyes went to the smoke detector on the ceiling above me. The house had a standard detector, the round white disc kind, the one that came with the house and had been there for probably 20 years. He looked at it for a long moment. Then I went out to my truck. In the back of my tool bag, under the spare wire nuts and the electrical tape, I kept a small device I had bought online about a year earlier after a string of break-ins in my own Brooklyn neighborhood had made me nervous about leaving the house empty. It was a camera, small enough to fit inside a standard smoke detector housing. The lens was barely visible, a pinhole opening behind a dark mesh screen, indistinguishable from the ventilation slots on any detector you had ever seen. He wired it directly into the house's electrical system behind the drywall, the same walls I had already opened up to fix the circuit breaker. 38 years of hospital maintenance work had taught me exactly how to run a clean, hidden line. The camera drew its power directly from the house's main electrical supply with a small internal battery as backup in case of a power outage. It did not connect to the home's Wi-Fi or any local network. Instead, it used its own embedded 4G cellular module to upload continuous footage directly to a private cloud account that only I controlled. No local storage, no hard drive inside the house that anyone could smash. Used to quiet, invisible signal going straight up into the sky. He had bought it for my own home and never installed it because Margaret would have found it and asked me what I thought I was doing, and she would have been right to ask. Standing in that hallway in January of 2021, looking at my daughter's blank, careful face and the cracked glass and the scrubbed stain on the pillow, I made a decision. He went back up on the stepladder. He took down the old smoke detector. I told Derek, who had wandered over from the couch to watch, that the sensor element on this model was outdated, and I had a newer unit in my truck that would be a lot more reliable. Derek looked at it. "Is that a Wi-Fi one?" "Connects to the cell network," I said, which was true. "Better coverage than Wi-Fi." He shrugged and went back to the couch. I mounted the new unit on the ceiling, ran a quick check to confirm the cellular upload was working, and noted the position. It had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire living room and the front door, roughly 270 degrees of coverage. The lens was pointed at the center of the room where the couch and the coffee table and the main floor space all converged. He climbed down off the stepladder. He folded it up and carried it back to my truck. He did not feel clever. He did not feel like I had been particularly strategic or smart. He felt like a man who was watching something terrible develop in slow motion and who did not know how to stop it directly. So he had done the only small, quiet thing he could think of to give himself a fighting chance if it ever came to that. He had never looked at the footage. Not once in 4 years. So many weeks I forgot the account even existed. Other weeks, the weeks when Jessica called and her voice was too bright or she cancelled plans at the last minute with an excuse that did not quite fit, I would find myself sitting in front of my laptop with the cursor hovering over the login page. And then I would close it and go do something else because I was not sure I was ready to know. Now, in the great pre-dawn quiet of my Brooklyn kitchen, I opened the laptop. I pulled up the login page. I typed in the username and password I had not used in 4 years. The page loaded. The green icon appeared. Active recording. I moved the cursor to the folder marked with yesterday's date. My hand was shaking so hard I missed the folder twice before I clicked on it. The video file was 14 hours and 23 minutes long. I pressed play. For the first 3 minutes, there was nothing but an empty living room and the faint sound of a television from somewhere off screen. Then the front door opened and Derek walked in, and Jessica came in behind him, and the way she walked through that door, the angle of her shoulders, the way she glanced at him before she crossed the threshold, made my throat lock up so completely that I could not have spoken a single word if someone had paid me. I watched the screen and I gripped the edge of the kitchen table with both hands and I did not look away. I watched 40 seconds of that video and then I shut the laptop. Not because I could not bear it. Because I had seen enough to know exactly what I was looking at, and I needed to think clearly, and I could not think clearly while Derek Vance's voice was coming out of my kitchen speakers at 4:15 in the morning. I thought about calling 911 right then. I picked up the phone twice. But 40 seconds of footage, 40 seconds of a man walking into a room and Jessica stepping back toward a wall, was not going to be enough. Not at 4:15 in the morning. Not without Jessica willing to talk to police. He had seen enough cases play out in the hospital over 38 years to know how it worked. A tired patrol officer, a husband with a smooth voice and a reasonable explanation, a wife who said everything was fine because saying anything else felt more dangerous than staying quiet. If I called that night with nothing but 40 seconds and a bad feeling, Derek would know I had the footage before I had a chance to use it. And then it would be gone. He needed to talk to Jessica first. He needed her to be ready. So I waited. And I called. And I called again. And every time the voicemail picked up, something tightened another notch in my chest. He stood up from the table. My legs felt wrong, loose at the joints, and like the scaffolding holding me up had lost several key bolts. He walked to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists the way Margaret used to tell me to do when my blood pressure spiked. He stood there with the water running until my hands stopped shaking enough to be useful. Then I picked up my phone and called Jessica. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was bright and ordinary, and it hit me somewhere behind the sternum like a closed fist. He hung up without leaving a message. He called again at 7 in the morning. Voicemail again. At 9. Voicemail again. At noon, sitting in my truck in the driveway because I could not make myself go back inside the house where the laptop was sitting on the kitchen table with 40 seconds of footage burned into the back of my eyes. By 3 in the afternoon, I had eaten half a piece of toast and drunk 4 cups of coffee and paced the length of my kitchen approximately 140 times. I kept telling myself there were reasonable explanations. Maybe she had left her phone in the car. Maybe Derek had taken her somewhere for the day to smooth things over after last night. Maybe she was at work, but no. It was Sunday. She would have been off, and she still was not answering. He sat down at the kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the sage green wallpaper and told myself to hold on. At 9:22 in the evening, My phone exploded. Not prank. Exploded. The vibration was so aggressive it walked the phone clean across the kitchen counter, and I lunged for it before it could hit the floor. The screen was lit up white and red. Emergency SOS. Jessica. Location: 1427 Hawthorne Avenue, Bronx, NY. My heart stopped. I am not speaking metaphorically. I felt it, a single horrible skip beat like an engine misfiring. And then it slammed back into rhythm so hard my vision pulsed. I hit call back. It rang and rang and rang. Nobody picked up. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? My daughter. My voice came out in pieces, each word separate and effortful. My daughter sent me an emergency SOS from her necklace. She is not picking up her phone. I have reason to believe her husband may be hurting her. The address is 1427 Hawthorne Avenue in the Bronx. Peace. My throat cracked open on the last word, and I did not try to fix it. Please send someone right now. Sir, I'm dispatching units to that address. What is your name? He was already in the garage. He did not remember putting on my jacket or picking up my keys. My body had made those decisions without consulting me. He backed out of the driveway so fast I clipped the edge of the mailbox post and heard the metal ring out but did not stop to look. The drive to the Bronx on the I-95 North took 45 minutes on a normal night. I made it in 28. I do not recommend the way I drove. I do not fully remember the way I drove. I remember the GPS dot on my phone, Jessica's location, not moving, not moving, not moving. And I remember pressing the gas pedal down further than it had any business being pressed. And I remember talking out loud to Margaret the entire way. She's okay, I told her. She has to be okay. He gave her the necklace. She pressed the button. That means she's still fighting. That means she's still there. He turned onto Hawthorne Avenue at 9:48, and my headlights swept across two Bronx police cruisers parked at angles in front of number 1427. Their light bars throwing red and blue across the neat colonial facades of the whole street. Two officers were at the front door. One was on the radio. The other had his hand on his holster. He threw my car into park before it had fully stopped moving, and I was out the door and running. That's my daughter's house. He shouted. My voice did not sound like my voice. It sounded like something being torn. That is my daughter in there. From inside the house came a crash, heavy and definitive, the sound of something large hitting the floor. And then a sound that I will never in my life be able to describe accurately to another human being. I sound like someone trying to breathe through something that was preventing them from breathing. Seen, desperate, raw. The officer at the door looked at me and looked at his partner, and something passed between them in less than a second. He raised his foot and drove it into the door just below the lock. The door frame splintered. The door flew open. Both officers went in fast and low. He was right behind them. Derek was in the center of the living room floor. He was on his knees over Jessica, one hand wrapped around her throat, his face red and contorted with an expression I had never seen on a human being before and hoped to never see again. The tipped-over coffee table lay on its side beside them. A thick folder of papers was scattered across the hardwood. The same folder. The same $75,000. The same 22%. A had brought the contract to finish what the dinner table had started. Get off her. The officer's voice cracked through the room like a bat hitting concrete. Hands up. Do not move. Derek's head snapped up. For one fraction of a second, his eyes found mine across the room. And what I saw in them was not guilt and it was not fear. It was calculation. Even now, even caught, his brain was already working the angles. Then the second officer had him by the arm, and Derek was on his feet and being turned toward the wall, and his wrists were being pulled behind his back, and he started talking, loudly, rapidly, his voice shifting into something aggrieved and reasonable all at once. This is a misunderstanding. She came at me first. I was defending myself. Arthur, tell them she's been unstable. She's been. See. The officer's voice was flat and final. You have the right to remain silent. I was not listening to Derek anymore. I was on my knees on the hardwood floor beside Jessica. She was on her back with her eyes half open and her chest moving in shallow, ragged pulls that made every single one of my own ribs ache in sympathy. Her left shoulder was sitting at an angle that turned my stomach. Her lip was split. There was a mark on her throat that I forced myself to look at directly because I was her father and looking away was not something I was willing to do. Even when what I was looking at was the worst thing I had ever seen. Jessica. My voice broke completely in half. I did not care. Jess. I'm here. That's here. Can you hear me? Her eyes moved, found my face, and the thing that happened in them when she recognized me, the way some small exhausted piece of her visibly let go of something it had been holding onto with everything it had. I felt that in every part of my body at once. The paramedics came through the door behind me. I heard them. The heavy roll of a gurney. The unzip of a bag. Professional voices calling things to each other in shorthand. A hand landed on my shoulder. Sir, we need to get in there. We need you to step back. I reached out and I took Jessica's cold hand in both of mine. I held on for one more second. 2. I pressed her fingers against my palm so she could feel that I was solid and real and not going anywhere. Then I let go and stepped back and let them do their work. Behind me, Derek Vance was still talking. Nobody was listening to him anymore. The emergency waiting room at Brooklyn Methodist smelled exactly the way I remembered it from 38 years of working in that building. Antiseptic and floor wax and something underneath both of those things that was harder to name. The particular smell of a place where people arrived broken and waited to find out how broken they were. I sat in a plastic chair against the wall with my elbows on my knees and my face in my hands and I did not move for a long time. A nurse came out at 10:45 and told me Jessica was being evaluated and that someone would update me as soon as they could. I said, thank you. My voice came out like gravel dragged across pavement. She looked at my face and went back through the double doors without saying anything else. I called Jessica's number 3 more times out of pure reflex, even though I knew she did not have her phone, even though I had watched the paramedics load her onto the gurney without it. On the 3rd call, I listened to her voicemail greeting all the way through for the first time, her voice bright and ordinary and completely unaware of everything that was coming, and I had to press the phone against my thigh so the man sitting 2 chairs down from me would not hear the sound I made. At 11:58, a doctor came through the double doors and called my name. She was young, younger than Jessica, it seemed to me, though I knew that was probably not true, with dark circles under her eyes and the particular efficiency of someone who had been on shift for too many hours and had learned to move fast because moving fast was the only way to get through a night like this one. Mr. Mitchell, she shook my hand, firm and brief. I'm Dr. Reyes. Your daughter is stable. I want to go through her injuries with you. Please, I said. The word came out ragged at the edges. She walked me through it in plain, careful language. Dislocated left shoulder, reduced in the ER, immobilized, Jessica would need physical therapy. Mild concussion. Soft tissue bruising to the throat consistent with manual strangulation under New York Penal Law, Section 121.12. She explained that classification carried its own charge independent of the assault, a Class D felony. The officers on scene had already been notified. He nodded through all of it. My jaw was clamped so tight I could feel the pressure behind my ears. Then Dr. Reyes paused. Mr. Mitchell, the x-ray showed something else. Your daughter's left shoulder, the one that was dislocated tonight, has evidence of a previous significant injury. Probably 3 years ago, based on the bone remodeling we're seeing. It was not treated properly at the time. The joint was never fully rehabilitated. The waiting room tilted slightly. He gripped the arm of the chair. 3 years ago, I said. Give or take, she said. The imaging is consistent with a dislocation that was either partially reduced or not reduced at all and then left to heal without proper intervention. She met my eyes directly. Mr. Mitchell, this kind of injury pattern, an untreated prior dislocation in the same joint that presents again following a domestic incident, is something we are required to document and report. He thought about a phone call 3 years ago. Derek's voice, smooth and apologetic. Jessica caught her shoulder on the stair railing when she was coming down with the laundry. "Sis, okay, Arthur." Used a little sore. Do you know how clumsy she can be sometimes? He had sent flowers. He pressed my hand over my mouth and held it there for a moment. "Can I see her?" he asked. Jessica was in a curtained bay at the end of the corridor, her left arm strapped across her chest in a sling, a thin hospital blanket pulled up to her waist. The overhead light was dim. She looked smaller than she was, the way people always look smaller in hospital beds, as if the machinery and the tubes and the white sheets have a shrinking effect on the human body. Her eyes were open when I came in. They found me immediately, and the moment they did, her face crumpled completely. Not a gentle tearing up, not a dignified dampening of the eyes, but a full collapse. Chin trembling, mouth pulling down at the corners, tears spilling over both cheeks at once in a way that she did not even try to stop. "Dad." Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and torn from what had been done to her throat. "Dad, I'm so sorry. My eyes burned so hot I could barely see." He crossed to the bed and took her right hand in both of mine and sat down in the chair beside her and said, "You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for. Do you hear me? Not one single thing. I should have told you." The tears were running freely down her face, dripping off her jaw onto the hospital blanket. "He should have told you so long ago, and I kept thinking I could fix it. He kept thinking he would change. And every time she stopped, swallowed hard against whatever her throat would allow. Every time he hurt me, he would cry afterward. He would actually cry, Dad. And I would end up comforting him. He would end up telling him it was okay." The burning behind my eyes became something sharp and physical. He pressed her hand harder. "How long?" he asked. He kept my voice steady by main force of will. Jace, how long has this been happening? She closed her eyes. 2 more tears tracked down her face. 4 years, she whispered. 4 years. He sat with that number in the middle of my chest where it landed like a piece of concrete. 4 years of phone calls where her voice was too bright. 4 years of cancelled plans. 4 years of long sleeves in summer and excuses about door frames and bathroom cabinets and stair railings. 4 years of me sending flowers and believing what I was told because believing was easier than knowing. Your mom, I said carefully. Did she know? Jessica opened her eyes. Something moved across her face, complicated and painful and exhausted all the way down to the bone. She knew about the stairs 3 years ago. She's the one who drove me to the urgent care. A breath, unsteady. She told me not to say anything. She said if I reported it, if it got out, it would. She said it would make things worse. She said Derek just needed time and support and that leaving would be the most selfish thing I could do. He thought about Evelyn sitting on that love seat in the cream-colored blouse last night, nodding along while Derek slid the folder across the table. I thought about the way she had looked at me when I refused to sign and said, "You're making a terrible mistake." Something cold and absolute settled in my chest. It was not anger exactly. It was the feeling of a door closing. The curtain shifted. A man stepped into the bay. Mid-40s, plain gray jacket, no tie, the particular quality of stillness that came from years of walking into rooms where terrible things had happened and learning to take up as little space as possible until he understood the situation. M.R. Mitchell. His voice was quiet and even. I'm Detective James Porter, NYPD Special Victims Unit. I'm sorry to interrupt. He can come back. No. He stood up, my knees ached. No, please come in. Porter looked at Jessica with the careful, non-pitying directness of a man who had learned that pity was not what people in hospital beds needed. Ms. Mitchell, I'm glad you're stable. I have a few questions when you feel up to it. There is no rush tonight. It turned to me. M.R. Michei, I'd like to speak with you privately for a few minutes if that's all right. He looked at Jessica. She nodded, a small and exhausted movement. In the hallway under the flat fluorescent light, Porter stopped and looked at me directly. He had gray eyes that did not waste motion. M.R. Mitchell, I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. He paused. Is there any possibility, any at all, that there is surveillance footage from inside that house that Derek Vance does not know exists? He looked at him for a long moment. The green cloud icon on my laptop screen floated up in the back of my mind, steady and patient and still glowing. Give me until tomorrow morning, I said. Porter studied my face. Whatever he saw there made him reach into his jacket pocket and pull out a card. He held it out. My direct number, he said. Anytime, day or night. He took the card. He looked down at it. Then I looked back up at the double doors of the emergency bay where my daughter was lying in a hospital bed with a dislocated shoulder, dislocated before and never properly healed. My hand closed around the card so hard the edges cut into my fingers. He did not go back to the hospital that night. Jessica had asked me to go home, her exact words delivered in that wrecked, barely there voice that made every syllable sound like it cost her something. Dad, go home. Sleep. I'm not going anywhere. And then she had closed her eyes and the nurse had given me a look that said the same thing more efficiently. So I had walked back out through the double doors and sat in my car in the Brooklyn Methodist parking garage for 20 minutes staring at the concrete wall in front of me before I finally started the engine. He slept for 3 hours, maybe less. He was back in the car before 6 in the morning. Porter's card on the passenger seat, a cup of gas station coffee steaming in the cup holder. He called him at 6:15. It picked up on the second ring. Porter. It's Arthur Mitchell. I'm ready. A pause, just one beat. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. Hawthorne Avenue at 7 in the morning looked stripped of everything that had made it seem normal the day before. The carved turkeys on the neighboring porches, the dog barking in the fenced yard 2 houses down. I live it still there technically, but the yellow crime scene tape across the front door of number 1427 had reclassified the entire street. You could not look at any of the ordinary things anymore without seeing that tape in your peripheral vision, right and wrong and absolute. Porter was already parked out front when I pulled up. He was standing on the sidewalk with a coffee of his own, wearing the same gray jacket from last night, looking like a man who had also slept approximately never. He gave me a single nod when I got out of my car. Morning, he said. Morning, I said. We went inside. The crime scene unit had been through already. He could tell by the fine gray dust on the surfaces near the door, the numbered yellow markers on the floor, the careful documentation of everything that had been in this room when the officers arrived last night. The coffee table was still on its side. The papers from the folder were still scattered across the hardwood, though someone had photographed them in place before leaving them. The room smelled like the cold had gotten in through the broken door frame and decided to stay. Porter walked to the front door first. He crouched down and looked at the doorbell housing. Camera mount, he said flatly. Empty. He looked. The bracket was there. The wiring was there. The camera itself was gone, pulled clean out of the housing. No camera remaining, just 2 stripped wire ends curling out of the wall like something had been yanked free by force. Living room camera? He asked. Porter straightened up and walked to the far corner of the room where a small shelf unit stood against the wall. There was a rectangular outline in the dust on the second shelf, a clean space where something had sat for long enough to leave its ghost behind. God. He walked into the hallway. He came back 30 seconds later. DVR unit was in the hall closet, he said. His voice had the particular flatness of a man delivering information he already knew was bad. It's in the kitchen sink, what's left of it. He walked to the kitchen doorway and looked. The digital video recorder, a small black box that had probably cost Derek $300, was sitting in the stainless steel sink in several large pieces. Something heavy had been brought down on it multiple times. The casing was cracked open. The hard drive inside was visible and had been hit separately, deliberately, with enough force to bend the metal casing. He had done this before he called me, before he sent that last text to Jessica, before any of it started. This was not a man who lost his temper. This was a man who cleared the field before he moved. He felt something tighten in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was something colder than both of those things. The feeling of understanding something completely all at once with no room left for doubt. Without the footage, Porter said from behind me, we have physical evidence of the assault. We have Jessica's testimony. We have the strangulation charge from the medical documentation. That's solid. It paused. He heard him shift his weight. But the loan documents, the attempted coercion, that's harder without video. His lawyer is already calling it a domestic dispute that escalated. Without footage of what happened in this room before the physical altercation, we may not be able to establish the financial extortion angle. He turned around. Porter was standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and his gray eyes moving around the room in that systematic way of his, cataloging everything, missing nothing. "What about proving he planned it?" he asked. "The fact that he destroyed the cameras before, premeditation." "Yes." Porter nodded. "That helps on the assault charge. It does not give us the conversation. It does not give us him telling her to sign the papers or threatening what would happen if she didn't." He met my eyes. "That's the piece that turns this from a domestic assault case into something significantly larger." He looked past him into the living room. My eyes went up the way they had the night before at the crime scene, moving across the ceiling with the particular attention of a man who had spent 38 years knowing where things were hidden inside walls and ceilings because he had put them there. The smoke detector was in the upper right corner of the living room, 8 feet up, the same position I had mounted it in 4 years ago on a cold January Saturday while Derek watched football on the couch and Jessica moved through her own house like a woman navigating a minefield. It was still there. Round, wheaty, completely unremarkable, sitting in its bracket on the ceiling, exactly where I had left it, looking like every other smoke detector in every other house in every other suburb in America. Derek had taken the doorbell camera. He had taken the living room camera. He had destroyed the DVR. He had walked right past the smoke detector without a second glance, the way you walked past every smoke detector you had ever seen in your entire life. Because his smoke detectors were furniture. They were part of the background. They were the thing you replaced the battery in once a year and otherwise never thought about. My heart rate did something complicated in my chest. "Detective Porter," I said. He looked at me. I pointed up at the ceiling at the round white disc in the corner. "That smoke detector," I said. "I installed it 4 years ago. It is not a smoke detector." Porter's eyes moved from my face to the ceiling and back again. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but the rapid, focused recalibration of a man who has just been handed a piece of information that changes the shape of everything. "What is it?" he said. "A camera," I said. "4G cellular upload. No local storage. Everything goes directly to a private cloud account that only I can access." Derek had no idea it was there. A beat of silence. Mr. Mitchell. Porter's voice was very quiet. "Go home right now. Open that account." "I'm already gone," I said. He was out the door before he finished the word. I drove back to Brooklyn the way a man drives when his body is operating on autopilot and his mind is somewhere else entirely. Hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, but the part of him that was actually present had already arrived at the kitchen table and was sitting in front of the laptop with his hand on the mouse. I was through the front door in under 25 minutes. He did not take off my jacket. He did not pour a cup of coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table, opened the laptop, and pulled up the login page for the cloud account before the screen had finished waking up. Username. Password. The cursor blinked at me 3 times while the page loaded. Then the dashboard opened. The interface was simple. I created thumbnails, one for each day the camera had recorded, going back 4 years. 4 years of quiet, unremarkable footage that I had never looked at. Evenings in an empty living room. Afternoon light moving across the floor. Derek watching television. Jessica walking through carrying laundry or a cup of tea, moving through her own home with that careful, contained quality I now understood for what it was. He did not look at any of that. He found yesterday's date in the grid and clicked on it. The file was large, 14 hours and 23 minutes of continuous recording starting from midnight and running through to when the power had been cut sometime after the police arrived. The thumbnail showed an empty living room in the gray afternoon light. He moved the playback bar forward, past the empty morning hours, past the afternoon. He stopped when the timestamp read 6:47 in the evening. The front door opened. Derek came in first. He was wearing the same jacket he had worn to dinner on Saturday night, and he was carrying the folder, the thick, black-clipped folder with the loan documents and the page hidden between them that we did not yet know about. And the way he carried it told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. Not tucked under his arm, not held loosely. Gripped in both hands. The way you carry something you have been thinking about all day. Jessica came in behind him. She was still wearing her coat. She had not taken it off yet, which meant this had started the moment they walked through the door, before she had even had a chance to set down her bag. He watched her face on the screen, the small laptop screen in my sage green kitchen in Brooklyn. And my throat closed up so completely that I had to press the back of my hand against my mouth and hold it there. She knew what was coming. He could see it in every line of her body. The way she stayed near the door. The way her eyes went to the folder in his hands and then quickly away, the way you look at something that frightens you and then try to pretend you did not see it. Derek set the folder on the coffee table. He sat down on the couch. He looked at Jessica with an expression I recognized now, a pleasant, patient, utterly empty look. And he said something I could not hear because the camera's audio pickup did not extend to a normal speaking voice at that distance. He reached for the volume bar and pushed it to maximum. His voice came through the laptop speakers, slightly compressed by the recording, but clear enough. Clear enough for every word to land. Your father made his position very clear last night. Derek's voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a man having a perfectly ordinary conversation. So now it falls to you. Either you call him tomorrow morning and tell him he needs to reconsider, or you sign it yourself. Jessica's voice was smaller, tighter. Derek, I can't forge my father's signature. That's fraud. That's, I didn't say forge. He picked up the folder, held it out toward her. I said sign your name as authorized representative. It's a technicality. It is not a technicality. Her voice was shaking now. Not with anger, with fear. The particular cadence of someone who has learned to be very careful about how much fear they let show. It's the same thing. And he would never authorize me, then convince him. Derek set the folder down on the coffee table with a flat, deliberate crack. Or we lose the house. And everything that happens after that is on you. What happened next made my stomach turn completely over. He stood up. He crossed the room. And Jessica, my daughter, my 35-year-old daughter who worked as a pediatric nurse and brought cupcakes to her colleagues on their birthdays, took one step backward toward the wall. When he smiled, automatic, deeply learned step backward, the way an animal moves when a larger animal enters its space. He pressed my fist against the table hard enough to hurt. What the camera recorded over the next 11 minutes, I will not describe in full. He will say that Derek Vance never once lost his temper in the way that people imagine when they imagine a man losing his temper. There was no explosion. There was no moment where he snapped and became someone different from the man he had been a moment before. It was the same man throughout. Controlled, deliberate. He would do something that made Jessica fold forward, gasping, and then he would step back and pick up the folder again and say very quietly, "Are you ready to sign?" And when she shook her head or could not answer, he would set the folder back down and the whole thing would begin again. This was not rage. This was a system. At the 11-minute mark, Derek leaned down close to Jessica's face. The camera caught his voice with terrible clarity. "If your father won't sign," he said, "you are not walking out of this house tonight." 4 minutes later, the SOS signal fired from Jessica's necklace. He watched the timestamp. 9:17 and 42 seconds. She had managed to press that clasp twice, fast, the way I had shown her, the way I had made her practice in the driveway 2 Christmases ago, with Derek's hands already on her throat. She had done it while she was losing consciousness. She had done it with what might have been the last voluntary movement she made before the lights went out. He closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen with my hands flat on the table and the sage green wallpaper around me and Margaret's photograph on the shelf watching me from across the room. Outside, a garbage truck was making its way down the block. He could hear it. The hydraulic grind, the crash of the compactor. And the complete normality of that sound against what I had just watched felt like something tearing. He picked up my phone. My hands were not shaking now. They had gone past shaking into something quieter and colder on the other side of it. He dialed Porter's number. It picked up before the first ring finished. "Porter. It's Arthur Mitchell. You have the video. You have everything." The whole conversation, all of it, from the moment they walked in the door. He paused for just a moment. "You need to come to my house right now." A beat of silence. "I'm already in my car, send me the address." Porter arrived in 18 minutes. He met him at the door. He did not offer him coffee. He walked him straight to the kitchen table, opened the laptop, logged back into the account, and pressed play. He did not watch it again. He watched Porter instead. He sat completely still for the entire duration. His hands were in his lap. His face did not change expression once. Not when Derek crossed the room the first time. Not at the 11-minute mark. Not when Jessica pressed the clasp. He watched with the focused, absorptive attention of a man filing everything he saw into precise compartments, sorting it, categorizing it, building something with it in real time. When the timestamp reached 9:17, he reached out and paused the video. He sat for a moment with his hand still on the mouse. Then he closed the laptop. One quiet, deliberate click. He turned to look at me. His gray eyes were absolutely steady. Whatever he was feeling, if he was feeling anything, it was locked somewhere I could not see. "M.A.R. Mitchell," James Porter said, and his voice was very quiet. "I have worked this unit for 15 years. He paused. In 15 years, I have never had a case hand me this much. Another pause. He just convicted himself on his own camera in his own living room. He looked at the closed laptop on my kitchen table. "What happens now?" he asked. Porter stood up. He straightened his jacket. He pulled out his notebook and clicked his pen. And for the first time since I had met him the night before, something moved in his face that was not quite professional detachment. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. The cold, hard, entirely earned kind. "Now," he said, "we go to work." Porter called me at 8:43 the following morning. He was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee I had been holding long enough for it to go cold, watching a pair of sparrows argue over something in the gutter of the garage roof. The phone buzzed on the patio table, and I looked at the screen and felt my stomach pull tight the way it had been pulling tight every time my phone rang for the past 48 hours. Mr. Mitchell. No preamble. Porter did not do preamble. I need you to come into the precinct this morning. There are things you need to hear in person. How bad? He asked. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Come in, he said. 9:30. The NYPD precinct in Brooklyn was a building I had driven past 1,000 times without ever going inside. The waiting area smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner and the particular exhausted patience of a place where people spend a lot of time sitting in plastic chairs waiting for news they did not want. A uniformed officer walked me back to a small conference room where Porter was already seated at a table with a manila folder in front of him and a look on his face that I had not seen before. Not grim exactly, but weighted. The look of a man about to hand someone a bill they had not known was coming. Sit down, Mr. Mitchell, he said. He sat down. Porter opened the folder. He turned it so I could read the top sheet. It was a financial summary, columns of numbers, account names, dates. And I looked at the total figure at the bottom of the page and felt the blood drain out of my face so completely that the room actually swam for a moment. That can't be right, I said. It is, Porter said. The number at the bottom of that page was not $75,000. It was not anywhere close to $75,000. $487,300. That was what Derek Vance owed across every account, every line of credit, every informal loan arrangement that the financial forensics team had been able to trace in the past 24 hours. Walk me through it, I said. My voice came out flat. He needed it flat. If I let any air into it, something was going to come out that I did not want Porter to see. Porter walked me through it. The commercial cleaning company, Vance Commercial Services. The business he had told me was doing well the first time we met. The business he had described as hitting a rough patch when he slid the folder across the dinner table. It had not been operational in nearly 14 months. The last legitimate job on record was the previous September. After that, the company had existed only on paper as a vehicle for moving money around in ways that required a forensic accountant to untangle. They had been running what Porter called a payment cycling scheme. Taking deposits from new clients for jobs he had no intention of completing, using that money to make minimum payments on older debts, cycling the funds through 3 separate business accounts to obscure the trail. 12 clients in Westchester County were currently owed a combined total of $62,000 for work that had never been done. The credit cards were worse. Many accounts across 5 different banks, cash advances on 7 of them. The statements showed a pattern that made my jaw ache. Restaurants I had never heard of, hotel charges in Atlantic City and twice in Las Vegas. Transactions at 4 different sports book locations in New Jersey over an 18-month period. He had a gambling problem, I said. He had a gambling catastrophe, Porter said. The sports betting alone accounts for approximately $115,000 of the total. The casinos account for another $55,000. He thought about Derek at the dinner table on Saturday. So smooth and reasonable, explaining that the business had hit a rough patch. Temporary. Manageable. Used to bridge loan. Used to formality. $115,000 on sports betting. He had been a bridge loan for a man throwing money at football games. The $75,000, I said. The loan he wanted me to co-sign. Where did that fit in? Porter turned to the next page in the folder. The $75,000 was step 1. If you had signed, it would have given him enough runway to service his most urgent debts for approximately 4 months. But that was never the end of the plan. He slid the page across the table toward me. We found this on his laptop. It was a document. A template, really. A loan application partially filled out with a blank space where the applicant's name would go. The applicant's name was not Derek Vance. The applicant's name was Arthur Mitchell. Below the application was a scanned image of my driver's license. My social security number typed out in the application field as though I had provided it myself. My bank account routing number. The name of my credit union in Brooklyn. My address. My date of birth. And at the bottom of the template document, in a separate text box, a collection of images. Photographs of my signature cropped from various documents. The birthday card I had signed for Jessica 3 years ago. A check I had written to Derek for the mortgage payment. A get well card I had sent when Jessica had the flu last winter. 17 separate instances of my handwriting assembled like a reference library. I had been collecting my signature for 3 years. My hands, which had been flat on the table, curled slowly into fists. If I had signed the co-signer agreement, I said carefully, he would have used my signature as a template to open additional loans in my name. That is our assessment, Jace. Porter's voice was even and precise. Based on the amounts we're seeing in his planning documents, we believe he intended to open between 5 and 8 additional credit lines totaling somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000. Combined with the original $75,000 cosign, that would have potentially exposed you to more than $250,000 of debt. At minimum, I said. Quite possibly more, Porter said. He sat with that number for a moment. $250,000. The value of my house in Brooklyn, roughly. The sum of 38 years of facilities engineer salary, set aside carefully, lived modestly, never touched because I had promised Margaret it would be there for Jessica if she ever needed it. I had planned to take all of it. Every last dollar. And leave me with the paperwork. There's one more thing, Porter said. Something in his tone made me look up from the page. I reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet. I held it for a moment before he slid it across the table as though he was giving me one more second before I had to look at it. It was a printout of an email chain. The subject line read, Arthur's documents attached. The sender's email address was one I recognized. One I had looked at on a holiday card every December for 23 years, even after the divorce, even after everything. Because Jessica always signed her mother's name alongside her own, and I had never had the heart to stop reading it. The email address was Evelyn Marsh's. The attachment icons below the message showed 4 files, a scanned tax return, a social security statement, a bank account summary, a copy of our divorce settlement from 2004, which contained on page 14 my complete financial disclosure, including account numbers, asset values, and routing information. She had sent it to Derek 2 weeks ago, 1 week before the Saturday dinner. 1 week before Derek had made the appointment with the lending institution to begin the cosign process. The room felt very still. My chest did something that was not quite pain and not quite grief and not quite rage, but contained elements of all three compressed into something dense and cold and sitting directly behind my sternum like a stone. She knew, I said. The words came out barely above a whisper. Porter did not soften it. It was not the kind of man who softened things, and I had already decided that I was grateful for that. The email record suggests she was aware that Derek intended to use the documentation to create financial pressure. Whether she understood the full scope of what he was planning, he stopped, chose his next words with care. That will be for the courts to determine. He looked down at the email printout. At Evelyn's address in the sender field. At the 4 attachment icons lined up in a neat row. He thought about Jessica in the hospital bed with the sling on her left shoulder and the mark on her throat. He thought about Evelyn sitting on the love seat in the cream-colored blouse on Saturday night, nodding along while Derek slid the folder across the table. I thought about Evelyn saying as she picked up her purse and walked out after them, "You're making a terrible mistake, Arthur." She had known what was in that folder. She had helped put it together. My hand moved across the table. My finger pressed down on the corner of the email printout. "What happens to her?" he asked. Porter met my eyes. "That depends on what we can establish about the extent of her knowledge. At minimum, we're looking at accomplice liability under New York Penal Law Section 20.00. It posed. We'll be bringing her in for questioning tomorrow morning." He nodded. He stood up. My legs felt steadier than they had any right to feel. He picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and folded it over my arm and looked at Porter across the table. "Detective," I said. 23 years ago, Evelyn and I sat across from a mediator in a conference room not very different from this one and divided up everything we had built together. He gave her the house in Westchester. He kept the one in Brooklyn. We agreed on a fair arrangement for Jessica, and we both signed it, and I thought that was the end of something. He paused. I never imagined we would end up in a room like this one again. Porter looked at me steadily. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell." "Don't be," I said. "And I meant it in the particular way you mean something when you have moved all the way through it and come out the other side into something cleaner. Just make sure you have everything you need." "We will," Porter said. He walked out of the precinct into the Sunday morning air, and the city went on around me the way cities do. Horns and pigeons and someone's music leaking out of a third-floor window. And I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my jacket over my arm and the cold November air on my face. Then I called Jessica. Jessica picked up on the first ring. "Dad." Her voice was still rough at the edges, still scraped raw from what had been done to her throat, but there was something steadier underneath it now. Something that had not been there 2 nights ago on the floor of that living room. "I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like someone used my shoulder for a baseball," she said. A pause. "And my throat for a stress ball." Another pause. "But I'm okay. I'm actually okay, Dad." He stood on the sidewalk outside the precinct with the November wind cutting through my jacket, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for 3 days. She sounded like herself. Battered and hoarse and hurting, but herself. "I need to tell you some things," I said. "Not right now. Later today when I come back. But I need you to know they're coming so you're not blindsided." "That bad? That thorough?" I said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay, Dad. I trust you." Those 4 words hit me somewhere behind the ribs. I pressed my free hand flat against the brick wall of the precinct building to steady myself, and I said, "I'll be there by those." And I meant it like a promise. Porter called me back at 11:47. The forensics team went back through the loan folder, he said. The physical folder. The one from Saturday night. He felt the skin on the back of my neck tighten. There was a page kept between the second and third loan agreement. Not numbered. Not referenced anywhere in the table of contents. It posed. M.R. Mitchell, it was a deed. The word landed in the middle of my chest like something dropped from a height. A deed, I repeated. A blank deed transferring ownership of the property at 1427 Hawthorne Avenue from Jessica Mitchell to a limited liability company registered in Delaware called H.H. Holdings LLC. Porter's voice was measured and deliberate, the way it got when he was delivering information he wanted me to absorb one piece at a time. Derek Vance is the sole registered agent of that company. We confirmed it this morning. He leaned against the wall. My legs had gone unreliable again. If she had signed the whole packet without reading every page, I started. He could have transferred the house to himself, Porter said. Legally, within 30 days, with the right notary. And we believe he had one arranged in Fort Lauderdale. The property would have been his to sell or mortgage as he pleased. Jessica would have had no legal standing to contest it. The Fort Lauderdale detail landed like a second stone on top of the first. He was going to take the house, I said. And then run. That is our current assessment, Jess. He stood on that sidewalk and I thought about Derek at the dinner table on Saturday. So patient, so reasonable, so absolutely certain that I would sign. And when I didn't, he had gone home and executed the backup plan. The plan that didn't require me at all. The plan that only required Jessica to be frightened enough to stop reading. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my back teeth. How long would she have had? He asked. After signing. Before she realized what she'd done. With a motivated buyer and a cooperative notary, Porter said. 3 weeks. Maybe less. 3 weeks. And then Jessica would have woken up one morning to find her house gone, her husband gone, and a collection of debts in her name that would have taken years to untangle. If she could have untangled them at all. There's something else, Porter said. Of course there is, I said, but I said it quietly. On his phone, we pulled the records this morning. There's a travel itinerary in his email drafts folder. A one-way flight to Fort Lauderdale booked for this coming Thursday. 4 days from now. He let that sit for a moment. And there are 47 text messages to a contact saved as Cass. A woman in Miami. The last message sent Saturday night reads. Just a few more days. Almost done. Then we're free. The wind off the street hit my face and I let it. He needed something cold and real and immediate to hold on to. He was never planning to stay, I said. No, Porter said. He wasn't. He ended the call. He put my phone in my pocket. He stood very still on the sidewalk outside the Brooklyn precinct while the city moved around me, indifferent and continuous. And I thought about Jessica saying, I trust you. For words that she had carried alone for 4 years without anyone earning them. He checked my watch. 1:15, I had 45 minutes to get to Brooklyn Methodist. He walked to my car, got in, and drove. The hospital room looked different in the afternoon light. Less emergency, more ordinary. The kind of ordinary that was almost worse. The 4-3. The monitoring equipment. The thin blanket tucked across Jessica's lap. I love it settling into something that looks like it might be permanent. And I hated that. The way you hate anything that tries to normalize a thing that should never have happened. Jessica was sitting up when I came in. The sling held her left arm across her chest. There was still bruising visible above the collar of her hospital gown, yellowing at the edges now, and I made myself look at it directly, the way I had made myself look at everything directly these past 3 days. Because looking away had never once protected either of us. You brought coffee, she said immediately, looking at the 2 cups in my hands. Hospital cafeteria, I said. I apologize in advance. She held out her good hand and took one of the cups and wrapped her fingers around it like it was something precious. Sit down, Anne. You look like you haven't slept in a week. 3 days, I said. Give or take. He sat in the chair beside her bed. He set my own coffee on the tray table. He looked at my daughter in the afternoon light coming through the window. The bruising, the sling, the hospital bracelet on her right wrist. And I felt the familiar tightening behind my sternum that had become my constant companion since Saturday night. Tell me, Jessica said quietly. Whatever it is, I can take it. So I told her. He told her about the $487,300. He watched her face go through several things at once. Disbelief first, then a kind of nauseated recognition, then something that looked like the expression of a person doing rapid arithmetic on how many years of her life she had spent inside a lie that large. $487,300, she said. Her voice was very flat. And he told me the business was doing fine. He told me the same thing, I said. The first night we met. She pressed her lips together hard. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. Then I told her about the deed. The blank deed kept between the loan agreements, transferring her house to a company she had never heard of, controlled entirely by the man she had been married to for 8 years. Jessica set the coffee cup down on the tray table very carefully. Her hand was shaking. Not a little. A full, visible tremor that she did not try to hide from me. And I was glad she didn't, because hiding things from me was what had cost us 4 years. He was going to take the house, she said. Yes. While I was still living in it. He was going to take it and leave. Before I realized what I'd signed. She pressed her right hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. Not a quiet misting over, but a sudden full welling up that spilled over before she could stop it. Tears cutting straight down both cheeks. She pulled in a breath that shook on the way in and shook on the way out. Cassandra, I said as gently as I could. Jessica looked at me over her hand. Something in her eyes said she already knew, or had known in the way you know something you have not allowed yourself to finish knowing. How long? She asked. Her voice cracked directly down the middle. The messages go back at least 8 months, I said. Probably longer. We don't have the full picture yet. She dropped her hand from her mouth. She looked at the window. Outside, the Brooklyn afternoon was gray and ordinary. Pigeons on a ledge. A water tower on a rooftop 2 buildings over. A patch of pale sky between the buildings. He was never going to change, she said. Not a question. The final, flat arrival at something she had been circling for a long time. No, I said. He wasn't. She turned back to me. Her eyes were wet and red, but her jaw was set in a way I recognized. The same set jaw Margaret used to get when she had made a decision and was done revisiting it. Good thing you gave me that necklace then, she said. Something cracked open in my chest. He reached across and took her hand, her good right hand, the one with the hospital bracelet, and held it in both of mine, the way I had held it in the ambulance on Saturday night. She squeezed back hard. Hard enough to hurt. And I let her, because she needed something solid to push against. And I was her father. And that was what I was there for. We sat like that for a while. Her hand in mine. The cafeteria coffee going cold on the tray table. The afternoon light shifting slowly across the floor. Then my phone buzzed on the tray table. A text from Porter. Mary Collins just walked into the precinct. Nabir from Hawthorne Avenue. She has a USB drive. You need to hear what's on it. I read it twice. Then I showed it to Jessica. She read it, looked up at me, and for the first time since I had walked into this room, something moved in her face that was not grief or pain or exhausted resignation. It looked cautiously and tentatively like hope. Go, she said. Exactly the way Porter had said it to me that morning in the living room on Hawthorne Avenue, pointing up at the smoke detector. One word. Absolute. He stood up. He squeezed her hand one more time. Same time tomorrow, I said. Jessica almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that promised a real smile was still in there somewhere, waiting for a better day to come out. Same time tomorrow, she said. He walked out of the hospital room and pulled out my phone and called Porter before I reached the elevator. Mary Collins was smaller than I expected. I do not know what I had been picturing during the 20-minute drive from Brooklyn Methodist to the precinct. Someone larger, perhaps. Someone whose 4 years of silent witness had left some visible mark on the outside. But the woman sitting in the chair across from Porter's desk was small and fine-boned. Maybe 5'2". Wet hair cut short and practical. And hands that she kept folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone holding themselves together through sheer concentration. On the desk in front of her was a USB drive. Ismail, black, the ordinary kind you bought in a 3-pack at the drugstore. She had both hands resting on either side of it, not touching it, as though it were something that might move if she looked away. Porter stood when I came in. Mr. Mitchell, this is Mary Collins. She lives at 1425 Hawthorne Avenue. Mary looked up at me. Her eyes were gray and direct and red around the rims in a way that told me she had been crying before I arrived or was very close to it. She pressed her lips together when she saw me and something moved across her face. Guilt and relief fighting each other for the same territory. You're Jessica's father, she said. I am, I said. He pulled a chair over and sat down across from her. Mrs. Collins, thank you for coming in. She shook her head sharply, the way you shake your head when someone thanks you for something you feel you should have done long ago. Don't thank me. Please don't thank me. I should have done this 4 years ago and I didn't. And I have to live with that. Her voice broke on the last 3 words. She pressed one hand over her mouth, collected herself visibly, her shoulders pulling back, her chin lifting. And then she lowered her hand and looked at me straight. I have a camera on my front porch, she said. I put it up in 2019 after someone broke into the Hendersons' garage 2 doors down. It covers my porch, my front walk, and part of the shared driveway between my house and Jessica's. She paused. It records continuously. He never deleted anything. He just kept adding storage. She reached out and put one finger on the USB drive. Did not pick it up, just touched it. 4 years, she said. I have 4 years of it. Porter leaned forward and took the drive carefully, like evidence, which it was. He walked it to a laptop on the side table and inserted it without a word. The screen filled with a file directory. Folders organized by month, going back to the fall of 2020. He clicked on a file from 18 months ago. The footage was outdoor. Gray afternoon light. The shared strip of concrete driveway between the two houses. The side fence with the gate that led to the backyards. The image quality was good. Better than good. Derek came through the gate first. Jessica was behind him. She was saying something I could not hear. The audio was partial at that distance. And Derek turned around, and the thing he did next was fast and deliberate and made my stomach lurch sideways. He took her phone out of her hand, walked to the edge of the yard where the small backyard pool sat covered for the season, and dropped it in. Then he turned back to Jessica and said something directly into her face, close enough that his breath would have been warm on her skin. Porter turned up the audio. Derek's voice came through, compressed and slightly distorted, but clear enough for every word to arrive intact. You call your father one more time, he said, and I will make that old man pay. The room went very quiet. He sat in that chair and I looked at the screen and I felt something happen in my chest that I did not have a word for. Not anger. Not grief. Something that was both of those things and underneath them something older and more fundamental. The specific pain of a parent who understands all at once and completely the full dimensions of what their child has been living through while they were standing close enough to almost see it and far enough away to miss it entirely. Porter clicked through several more files. Each one was different and each one was the same. The controlled, systematic nature of it. The way Derek moved through his own cruelty with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for any of it. By the third clip, Mary Collins was crying quietly in her chair. Tears running down her face without drama. The way people cry when they are too tired to cry any other way. She used to wave at me, Mary said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Every morning when she went to get the mail, she had this way of waving, just her hand, just a small movement. But it was every single morning without fail. She stopped, wiped her face with the back of her hand. The last year she stopped. I told myself she was just busy. I told myself a lot of things. I looked at this woman. 67 years old. With hair. Red rim made eyes. 4 years of footage on a drugstore USB drive. And I thought about all the ways people found to not see what they could not bear to see. And I understood it. And I could not blame her for it because I had done the same thing every time I hung up the phone after one of those too bright conversations with Jessica and told myself she was fine. Mrs. Collins, I said. Did she ever look at you in those 4 years? Like she was trying to tell you something she couldn't say out loud. Mary looked at me. Her chin trembled badly for a moment before she got it under control. Every single day, she said. Porter walked Mary through a formal statement after that. I excused myself and went out to the hallway and then out through the precinct's side door into the parking lot because I needed air and I needed it immediately. I walked to my car I got in, I closed the door. And then I put both hands over my face and I wept. Not the burning, controlled thing I had been managing since Saturday night. Not the careful, functional grief of a man who needed to keep moving. This was something else entirely. Deep and ragged and entirely beyond managing. Coming up from somewhere that had been sealed shut for 3 days and could not stay sealed one moment longer. Jessica waving at her neighbor every morning. That dismal, daily gesture of reaching out across a fence to another human being. The closest thing to a cry for help she had been able to make in a house where her phone ended up at the bottom of a swimming pool if she called her father too many times. He sat in that car in the precinct parking lot until it was done. Then I wiped my face with both hands, took 3 slow breaths, and called Porter. She gave us everything we need, Porter said before I could speak. Combined with your footage and the financial records, we now have documented evidence of a sustained pattern going back 4 years. A post. His lawyer is going to tell the court this was a one-time incident. We are going to show them it was a career. He looked out through the windshield at the gray November sky over Brooklyn. Good, I said. Make sure they see all of it. Porter called on a Thursday morning, 1 week before the trial date. Someone walked in last night, he said. You need to meet him. Kevin Dole was 35 years old and looked like a man who had not slept properly in several months. It was thin in the way that came from stress rather than discipline, with dark circles carved deep under his eyes and the particular restlessness of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was not entirely sure how to put it down now that he finally had the chance. It was sitting in the same chair Mary Collins had sat in a week earlier. On the table in front of him was a shoebox. Not a folder, not a briefcase, a shoebox. The cardboard kind with the lid slightly askew because it was too full to close properly. M.R. Mitchell. He stood up when I came in, reached across the table to shake my hand. His grip was firm, but his hand was cold. Kevin Dole. He worked for Derek Vance for 2 years. He sat down. I know who you are, I said. Detective Porter told me. Thank you for coming in. He sat back down and looked at the shoebox and then looked at me. And the guilt on his face was so naked and unguarded that I felt something unexpected. Not anger toward this man, but a recognition. The specific expression of someone who had told themselves a necessary story for too long and had finally run out of ways to believe it. He should have come sooner, he said. His voice was tight. I knew what he was doing. Not all of it. He didn't know about Jessica. He swore I didn't know it had gotten to. He stopped, pressed his hand flat on the table, started again. I knew about the books. The fake invoices. The clean. He told me it was temporary and I needed the job, and I told myself it wasn't my problem. What changed? He asked. You did, he said. Or not you specifically, but when I saw the arrest on the news, his name, his photo, he shook his head slowly. I've got a sister younger than Jessica. And I thought about, he stopped again. His jaw worked. I thought about someone doing that to her and some guy who knew sitting on a shoebox full of evidence because he was scared of losing a paycheck. He reached out and pushed the shoebox toward me. He lifted the lid. Inside there were printed emails, invoice copies, bank transfer records, and a small notebook with handwritten entries dating back nearly 2 years. Everything organized, everything dated. The careful documentation of a man who had understood from early on that he might need to protect himself someday. Porter leaned over my shoulder. The invoices show a pattern of billing for materials never purchased and labor never performed. The emails show Derek directing Kevin to alter records and backdate documents. He reached in and lifted a single printed page from near the bottom of the box. This. It was a text message transcript. Dated to Kevin, 14 months ago. The old man won't sign forever. When he does, I need you to play bank officer. Call him. Tell him the cosign is routine. Calm him down if he gets suspicious. EAJ make it worth your while. Kevin had refused. The next message in the chain from Derek was a threat about the altered invoices. Do what I ask or I'll make sure you go down with me. Kevin had kept everything. Why didn't he just delete all this? He asked, looking at the shoebox. Because he thought I was too scared to use it, Kevin said. He was mostly right. He looked at me steadily. Until he wasn't. He looked at this young man across the table. 35 years old. A shoebox full of evidence. Dark circles under his eyes. A sister he had thought about when he finally decided to do the right thing. And I understood completely why it had taken him this long. And I did not hold it against him for a single second. Mr. Doyle, I said. You came forward when it counted. That's what matters. Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly, more like a breath he had been holding for 14 months finally making it all the way out. Porter closed the shoebox lid with a quiet, deliberate click. Combined with the cloud footage, Mary Collins's USB, and the financial forensics, he said, what Kevin has given us moves this case from domestic assault with financial elements to organized fraud and criminal conspiracy. He looked at both of us. Derek Vance's attorney is going to walk into that courtroom expecting to argue heat of passion and financial desperation. He paused. He is going to be very surprised. 8 months after that night on Hawthorne Avenue, Jessica and I walked into the Bronx County Courthouse together. She wore a dark blue dress and her hair down, and she walked without the sling now, though I knew the shoulder still ached in cold weather because she rubbed it sometimes without realizing she was doing it. He wore the same charcoal suit I had worn to Margaret's funeral because it was the only suit I owned and because Margaret would have found that funny. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old paper and the particular nervous energy of a room full of people waiting for something that could not be undone once it started. Derek was already at the defense table when we came in. He was wearing a gray suit that fit him poorly across the shoulders, and he had the careful downcast expression of a man performing remorse for an audience. His attorney, young, expensive looking with a silk tie, leaned close and said something in his ear. Derek glanced up when Jessica and I took our seats at the plaintiff table. He looked at Jessica first, then at me. He looked back at him steadily and said nothing, and after a moment, he looked away. Behind the defense table in the gallery, Gerald and Patricia sat in the second row. They did not look at us. They stared straight ahead at the bench with the fixed attention of people trying very hard to appear as though they were somewhere else entirely. Evelyn sat beside them. She was wearing black. She kept her eyes on the floor. Derek's attorney gave his opening. Stressed man. Temporary loss of control. Financial pressure. No prior record. He used the word tragedy 4 times. He used the phrase loving husband twice. He gestured toward Jessica with practiced sympathy and called what happened a domestic dispute that escalated beyond anyone's intentions. Jessica sat beside me with her hands folded on the table and did not react to a single word of it. Here Joe was said her eyes were clear. She had decided somewhere in the past 8 months that she was done performing reactions for people who had already decided what they wanted to see. The prosecutor stood up. She was a compact woman in her 40s with the unhurried confidence of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Your Honor, she said, the people request permission to submit and publish Plaintiff's Exhibit 1. The defense attorney frowned. Objection. Foundation already established in pre-trial proceedings. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, the court has already ruled on admissibility. Jutge Patricia Owens looked over her glasses. Overruled. Proceed. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. The screen at the front of the room came to life, and Derek Vance watched himself walk into his own living room. The footage was exactly as I remembered it from my kitchen table 8 months ago. Clear, wide angle, the green gray of night vision in the dim room. The jury watched Derek set the folder on the coffee table. They watched Jessica flinch when he raised his voice. They watched him cross the room with that deliberate, unhurried stride. And then they watched him stop and pick up the folder and ask calmly if she was ready to sign. And when she shook her head, they watched him set it back down. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. A woman in the front row of the jury box, older, silver-haired, the kind of grandmother who brought casseroles to sick neighbors, pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright and horrified. The prosecutor let the video play without comment. She did not narrate. She did not editorialize. She let 11 minutes of footage speak for itself. And then she let the silence after it sit in the room for 5 full seconds before she spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, what you just watched is not a man who lost his temper. It is a man who made a choice. The same choice over and over for 11 minutes. Every time he asked that question and received an answer he didn't like. She clicked off the screen. Derek was staring at the table in front of him. His face had gone the color of old concrete. His attorney had stopped writing on his legal pad. He looked at Jessica. She was looking at Derek, not with hatred, not with fear, with the clear, level gaze of someone who had spent 8 years being afraid of a man and had just watched that fear become completely unnecessary. Her chin was steady, her hands were still. She did not look away from him, and he could not make himself look at her. The jury filed out to deliberate at 3:47 in the afternoon. Jessica and I found a bench in the hallway outside and sat down, and she leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, and I put my arm around her, carefully, careful of the shoulder, and we sat there in the fluorescent light of the courthouse hallway and waited. The jury came back at 7:41 in the evening. We had been in that hallway for nearly 4 hours. Jessica had fallen asleep against my shoulder at some point around 6:00, and I had sat perfectly still for 40 minutes rather than move and wake her. My arm around her carefully, watching the courthouse empty out around us as the afternoon shifted into evening and the overhead fluorescence took on the particular flat loneliness of institutional lighting after dark. When the bailiff came out and told us the jury had reached a verdict, Jessica lifted her head and looked at me with eyes that were still half asleep and entirely calm. Okay, she said simply. Let's go. We walked back into the courtroom together. Derek was already at the defense table. He had loosened his tie slightly in the hours since the video, a small dishevelment that somehow made him look more diminished than if he had come apart entirely. His attorney was writing something rapidly on a legal pad. Derek himself was staring at the table with the fixed inward attention of a man running numbers that kept coming out wrong. Jutge Patricia Owens entered. Everyone stood. Be seated, she said. She did not look at Derek. She looked at the jury foreperson, a middle-aged man in a blue shirt, who stood with his shoulders back and his jaw set and held the verdict form in both hands the way you hold something that matters. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of strangulation in the second degree under New York Penal Law Section 121.12, how does the jury find? Guilty. Jessica's hand found mine under the table. Her fingers were as cold and she gripped hard and I gripped back and neither of us looked at each other because we were both looking straight ahead and neither of us trusted ourselves to do anything else. On the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, how does the jury find? Guilty. On the charge of coercion in the first degree, how does the jury find? Guilty. On the federal charge of wire fraud under Title 18, United States Code Section 1343, how does the jury find? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial fraud, how does the jury find? Guilty. Each word landed in the room with a weight that did not diminish with repetition. If anything, each one hit harder than the one before it. The way waves hit ashore, not wearing it down, but revealing what was already there underneath. Derek's attorney stopped writing. Derek put both hands flat on the table. His shoulders dropped forward by maybe half an inch. It was not dramatic. It was the specific mechanical deflation of a man whose calculations had finally and completely failed him. Ruth Owens looked at him directly for the first time since she had entered the room. Mr. Vance, she said, I have presided over this court for 19 years. In that time, I have seen many cases that involve financial exploitation combined with domestic violence. What distinguishes this case, she paused and her voice did not change temperature but something in it sharpened, is the degree of premeditation. The systematic nature of the abuse. And the deliberate targeting of vulnerability. She picked up the sentencing document. On the state charges of strangulation, aggravated assault, and coercion, this court sentences you to 7 years in the custody of the New York State Department of Corrections. The federal wire fraud conviction, processed through a joint prosecution with the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, carries an additional 5 years in federal custody to be served consecutively. She set the document down. Total sentence, 12 years. You will serve every day of it. She looked at the bailiff. A permanent order of protection is hereby issued for Jessica Mitchell and Arthur Mitchell under Criminal Procedure Law Section 530.13. Mr. Vance is to have no contact, direct or indirect, with either party for the remainder of his natural life. The bailiff moved toward Derek. The handcuffs came out. The sound they made, that specific metallic ratcheting, the click and the lock, was not loud. It was actually quite small in a room that size. But it went through me like something physical. Something that started in my chest and moved outward to my fingertips. And I had to look down at my hands where they rested on the table. These hands. 62 years old. Calloused from 38 years of tools and pipes and circuit breakers. Soft at the knuckles now in the way that hands go soft when they stop doing heavy work. The hands that had written check after check after check in a brown ledger. The hands that had gripped a steering wheel on the I-95 north at 9:17 on a Saturday night in November. The hands that had held Jessica's cold fingers in an ambulance and refused to let go until someone made them. These hands had not saved her from everything. But they had been there when it counted. Derek did not look back as the bailiff walked him toward the side door. He did not look at Jessica. He did not look at me. He looked at the middle distance at nothing. And then the door closed behind him and he was gone. At the defense table, Evelyn sat with her head bowed. When Judge Owens read her sentence, 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service under New York Penal Law Section 20.00, she did not react. She just sat there with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor. And I thought about all the Sunday dinners and all the phone calls and all the times she had looked at her daughter's life and chosen the version of it that was easiest for her to live with. He did not feel angry at her anymore. He felt something much quieter than anger. Something that had no good name in English and probably did not need one. Geral and Patricia left without speaking to anyone. He watched them go. Jessica stood up beside me. She smoothed the front of her dark blue dress with her good hand. She looked at the side door that Derek had gone through. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was steady, and she was smiling a small, real, entirely unperformed smile. The kind that did not know it was happening. "Ha, Dad," she said. "Used that. Used those 2 words. The way you say them when you have been somewhere very far away and you have finally come back to a place you recognize." "Ha, sweetheart," I said. We walked out of the courtroom together, and the heavy oak doors closed behind us, and the hallway outside was bright and ordinary and smelled like floor polish and the evening air coming through the building's front doors. And somewhere outside on the street, a car horn sounded, and a bus exhaled at its stop. And the city went on exactly the way it always had. He put my arm around my daughter's shoulders, careful of the left one, always careful. And we walked toward the exit together, and I did not look back. 1 month after the verdict, the house in Brooklyn was nothing but cardboard boxes and echoes. I had lived here for 33 years. The sage green kitchen walls Margaret had chosen over my objections. The porch steps where I had nearly dropped her the day we moved in, 33 years of a life that had started with the 2 of us and narrowed slowly and then all at once down to just me and a brown ledger in a kitchen drawer. Now, even the ledger was packed. He was wrapping the last of the kitchen dishes in newspaper when I heard the mail slot click. He dried my hands and walked to the front door. One envelope. Cream-colored paper. Seek. He recognized the handwriting before I picked it up. Evelyn. He stood in the empty hallway holding it. Something moved through me. Not hope exactly, but the stubborn, irrational flicker of a man who had once built a life with this woman and had never entirely stopped wishing she had been different than she was. Jessica arrived while I was still standing there. She let herself in with her own key, saw the envelope, saw my face, and held out her good hand. "I'll read it," she said. "Jess, add." Her voice was gentle but absolute. "Give it to me." I gave it to her. She sat on the living room floor, no furniture left, everything already on the truck outside, and read all 6 pages without stopping. He stood in the doorway and watched her face move through things I could not name and did not try to. When she finished, she squared the pages against her knee. Then she tore the letter in half. Then in half again. She kept tearing until the pieces were too small. Gathered them in her palm. Walked to the kitchen and dropped them in the empty trash can. They landed with a sound so small it was almost nothing. She turned around. She didn't ask how my shoulder was, Jessica said. 6 pages. Not 11. She leaned against the counter. She said I should drop the restraining order. She said the neighbors are still talking. She said she forgives me. She looked at the trash can. I think I'm done waiting for her to be someone she has never been. My phone rang. Geral. He declined it. Patricia called 30 seconds later. He declined that too and blocked both numbers while Jessica watched. "Donne," she said. "Donne," I said. I picked up Margaret's photograph from the counter, pressed it gently against my chest for a moment. "We kept her safe," I said quietly. "To Margaret, not to Jessica. It took longer than it should have, but she's okay." He wrapped the photograph in newspaper and tucked it into the last open box. The doorbell rang. The truck driver. I loaded. Ready when we were. He carried the last box out through the front door and down the porch steps. The November air was cool and clean. The maple in the front yard had gone completely red overnight. I closed the truck, stood on the sidewalk, said goodbye to 33 years. The way you say goodbye to something that gave you everything it had. Then I turned around. Jessica was standing behind me with her car keys and a smile so wide and unguarded it stopped my breath. A smile with nothing behind it to fear. "Texas," she said. Something warm and certain settled in my chest. "Texas," I said. Austin in December was nothing like Brooklyn in December. In Brooklyn, December meant gray skies and slush on the sidewalks and the particular bone-deep cold that came off the East River and settled into your joints like it intended to stay. In Austin, December meant mornings that started cool and opened up into something almost warm by noon, with a sky so blue and so wide that the first time I stepped outside and saw it, I stood on the porch for a full minute just looking at it. The way you look at something you forgot was possible. We had been here 5 months. Jessica's flower shop was 3 blocks from an elementary school. Her idea, deliberately, because she said she wanted to be where children were. She had named it Margaret's, which had made me cry in the parking lot when I saw the sign go up. Ugly, gasping, crying that I had been completely unprepared for. And Jessica had handed me a paper towel from her apron pocket without comment, which was the right thing to do. My repair shop was 4 blocks in the other direction. Small, 1 room. A hand-painted sign in the window that said Mitchell Fix It that Jessica had made herself, slightly crooked, which I refused to straighten because crooked was how she had made it and perfect was how I wanted to keep it. On Saturday mornings, we had coffee on the porch. This particular Saturday, the air was cool and still, and the street was quiet, and the coffee was from the good beans Jessica had found at the farmer's market 2 weekends ago, and it was without question the best cup of coffee I had drunk in 62 years of living. Jessica was sitting across from me with her feet tucked under her and her mug held in both hands. The left shoulder moved freely now. Physical therapy had seen to that. She reached into the pocket of her flannel shirt and set something on the small table between us. The necklace. The silver necklace with the tracking device built into the pendant. The scuffed clasp, the worn chain. The one she had been wearing on the night of November 16th when she had pressed it twice, fast, with the last voluntary movement she could manage. He looked at it. "You still have that," I said. "I'll always have it." She wrapped both hands around her mug again. "I thought about getting a new one. Nicer one. But every time I go to do it, I think no. This one. It's pretty beat up," I said. "I know." She looked at it on the table between us. "That's kind of the point." He picked it up, turned it over in my hands. The back was scratched from 4 years of daily wear. The chain had a small repair near the clasp where Jessica had fixed it herself with a sewing needle and dental floss. He had not noticed that before. And the sight of it, that small, careful repair, made something ache quietly in the center of my chest. "What does it remind you of?" he asked. When you look at it. She thought about that seriously, the way Jessica always thought about serious questions, taking her time, not performing an answer. That I wasn't alone, she said finally. Even when I was sure I was. Even in that room, in that moment when everything was, she stopped, took a breath, took a sip of coffee. I pressed that clasp and somewhere across the city, you were already moving. He didn't know that then, but you were. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. I want to remember that feeling. That even at the very worst moment, someone was already on their way. He set the necklace back down on the table between us. I looked at Margaret's photograph through the window. He had put her on the windowsill where the morning light hit it, because Margaret had always complained that our apartment in Brooklyn didn't get enough light, and I had decided that wherever we went next, she was going to get enough light. I kept my promise, I said softly. To her, to the photograph, to the woman who had asked me with her last breath to take care of the girl we had made together. I couldn't protect her from every painful thing. I tried and I couldn't, and I'm sorry for that. But I was there when she needed me. He was there. Jessica reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She did not say anything. She did not need to. We sat like that for a while. Father and daughter. 2 cups of good coffee. A December morning in Texas. A beat-up necklace on the table between us, like a small monument to the fact that we had both come through something and were still here. Still sitting across from each other. Still choosing to spend our Saturday mornings this way. After a while, Jessica said, same time next week. He turned my hand over and squeezed hers. Same time every week, I said. For as long as you'll have me. She smiled at that. A full, warm, unguarded smile. The kind that reached all the way to her eyes and kept going. And she picked up her coffee and looked out at the Austin morning. And I sat across from her and thought about all the things a person could lose and still find their way back to a porch, a cup of coffee, and the person they love most in the world sitting right across from them. Real family, I thought, is not the people who demand your silence to keep their peace. Real family is the people who are already moving before you even finish pressing the button. The people who will drive through the dark at whatever speed it takes, for as long as it takes, because somewhere on the other side of that dark there is someone who needs them and they are not going to let that person down. Not today. Not ever. Not as long as there is still road left to drive. Looking back at this family story, I want to be honest with you. He waited too long. He saw the signs and kept telling myself stories that were easier than the truth. Don't do what I did. If something feels wrong inside your own home, trust that feeling before someone you love ends up in a hospital bed. I am not a hero. I am a father who made a promise and refused to break it. So many days I believe God placed that necklace in my daughter's hands at exactly the right moment, because no one who is truly fighting for someone they love should ever have to fight alone. This family betrayal did not break us. It showed us who we actually were underneath everything we had been told to accept. Every family story carries a moment where you have to choose between what is comfortable and what is right. We lost years to the wrong choice. And what remained after we finally chose correctly was simple. 2 people. 1 porch. 1 morning. And the quiet certainty that we had chosen each other when it counted most. If this family story reminded you of someone you love who is still waiting for a door to be broken down, share this with them today. And if you have lived through a family betrayal of your own, leave a comment below. Let me know I am not the only one. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. You being here matters more than you know. Thank you for staying until the very last word. Day in.